So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our quarterly info session on sustainable aviation fuels organized by the MEDGEM Network in collaboration with International Power-to-X Hub. So this collaboration reflects our shared objective to advance sustainable fuel pathways that are essential to decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors such as aviation. Aviation is among the fastest growing sources of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide and is facing increasing regulatory, financial, and societal pressure to decarbonize. Sustainable aviation fuels are widely recognized as a key near and medium-term solution, offering meaningful emissions reductions while preserving air connectivity and economic benefits. Yet the SAF landscape remains complex, shaped by diverse feedstocks and technologies, rapidly evolving regulations, particularly in the EU, and significant investment and operational challenges across the aviation value chain. In our session today, we will provide an overview of the current state of the EU sustainable aviation fuels market, with a focus on market dynamics and key initiatives. And on the other hand, we'll delve deeper into key regulatory questions. So this is our agenda for today, and our speakers are Mischler, Director of International Power-to-X Hub, who will be covering market overview and key recent developments. Antonio Fernandez, EU Policy and Regulatory Advisor at the International Power-to-X Hub, and MEDGEM Helpdesk Expert, covering technological scope of the SAF target, and our special guest, Matthias, Almann, Senior Consultant and Partner at LBST of Germany, who will cover co-processing of different fuels and proportional allocation. Matthias is an international leading expert on hydrogen, SAF, and other derivatives certification, and has supported governments and industry on this topic in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Matthias has been a key expert in the development of Certify, which is one of the 3 voluntary schemes of RFMBO certification recognized by the European Commission. So without further ado, we'll start with our sessions, and I'll pass on the floor to Frank Mischler.
Good morning, everybody. Very good to speak to you today on SAF. We had a SAF session at the very beginning of the MEDGEM network. It was 2 years ago. But it's always good to refresh our memories. And as Touffic rightly said, it's one of the most pressing needs that we have to decarbonize, and maybe one of the most difficult ones. The International PTX Hub is with you today, Antonio and I. We do a lot of other things than aviation, also working on shipping, for instance. You may know us from our training sessions. Of course, the policy and regulatory advice is the most important, because this is where Antonio and Jan have the most interaction with MEDGEM. Okay, so on the market overview. So first, very quickly, how big of a problem is it that what we are talking about? The world CO2 emissions last year were 38 billion CO2, the record high that we ever had. Transport is 1/5 of it, the bulk of it, road transport. But aviation is roughly 2.6% of the entire world's CO2 emission, and growing. So in the next 15 years, we expect a doubling of flights. So that will increase. There's also a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions now on global warming, not fuel related, which has to do with the contrails, which adds roughly double the amount again. And aviation has it's very difficult to decarbonize, as we will discuss today, and Touffic already said. So it is a big problem that we have, and thanks to the EU, they are taking it head on, and others need to do as well. So this, I already said, well, there's a huge growth. This just as a map, you see that most of the growth is happening in Asia, in India, in the MENA region. Maybe easier if we see it in a bar chart like this. Amazingly, from 94 to 34, that's only 40 years. We have an 8-time increase in passenger traffic, and mostly driven by Asia. well, including China and the Middle East, and the proportion of North America and Europe is diminishing more and more. I don't have North Africa here as specifically mentioned. It's unfortunately in the Middle East bracket, but as you may know yourself, the annual growth in the North African countries is also 4 to 6% annually. So it's, I think Egypt stands with 42.5 million passengers a year. Morocco and Algeria less, but the growth rates are amazing. So and it's a lot about short-haul flights connecting Europe to North Africa and the big hubs in Turkey and Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So something needs to be done as well in North Africa on a global level. The ICAO, which is the UN body, has agreed with all its members on a net zero goal by 2050, the long-term aspirational goal. But 2050 is very, very close. It's in 25 years. And if you just look at the planes, how long they are in service, at least 40 years, if not longer, and the order books are really full. We now have roughly 28,000 planes in operation worldwide. And according to the order books of Airbus and Boeing, this will increase to 42,000. And those planes will come in the next 10 years. So a plane that will arrive in 2035 and start operation will work for another 40 years until 2075 or even longer. So we have a big problem at hand. We have more and more planes. It's in the problem. The aviation is increasing, and we have little solutions thus far, or solutions that are very, very expensive. But it's good that more and more countries and regions have adopted laws to do something about this problem. You see all the regions and countries that are in dark green have mandatory laws. Antonio later will talk about the EU, so I don't touch upon this. I also see Egypt and Morocco with incentives. And so if you have a little time, it would be really great to hear from representatives of those countries to talk what's the discussion in their country and whether these incentives may, in the medium term, maybe move to obligations as well. Because on the global level, if I may say, the CORSIA, which is the framework, is relatively unambitious. So it will not be sufficient to really, bring the curve downward, but that's not for today. When you look at the methods that we can take to reach the net zero goal by 2050, they are various. So we mostly talk about the fuel side, and it's clearly the most important, but others have to be taken on as well. So like ground operations, how long the taxiing takes, so how long the motor is switched on off the planes without really flying, the type of planes, the technology used, the propulsion. There's a lot of innovation, and it's gradual. It's a little bit, but that can be done immediately without changing the infrastructure or major things. It can be done immediately. Retiring older planes earlier than foreseen and bringing out new ones. All of these are things, but with all said and done, it is on the fuel side that we really, really make a difference. So according to this study by ATAC, the Air Transport Aviation Action Group, it is 70%, maybe it's even more. And if you have the growth in mind that you also see here again, this is something that we have to get on really, really quickly and decisively. I think it's noteworthy where the problem is the biggest. So if you divide short, medium, and long haul flights into thirds, so this is roughly thirds that you see here, with the different plane types. you see that the short-haul flights are those that have the highest emission intensity per kilometer, of course, because departure is the most energy intense. And that could lead us to a discussion whether there are different solutions that we could have, because the bigger a plane and the longer the duration they fly, the less alternatives we have to fuels. So the current fuel, or if we want to replace that, it would be sustainable aviation fuel. For very, very small planes, like the commuter planes of 20 seats, yeah, there's a lot of innovation going on turning those to electric. And I guess that will come. There are many, many companies doing that, but that won't really replace any current flights. It will just add flights between cities where it's currently it's not economic to have flights. That you would add those. And hydrogen, you may have heard in the news that Avia and Airbus, they're all looking into it, but they push the due date further down the road. So we won't see that in 2040, maybe 2045, but this requires new airplane types. It needs new infrastructure at airports. So until this goes into mass production, I don't know what time we are talking, but it will be in the distant future. So it's SAF and only SAF that is the solution right now. So I think in this round, it may be a little bit too much to talk about the different SAFs in the technological specificities. Suffice to say that there are currently 8 different SAF routes that are certified. 2 of them are synthetic sustainable aviation fuels, the Fischer-Tropsch route. The other 6 are bio-based. And they're and all of them have to be blended with Jet A1, so with the fossil fuel. They cannot be used 100%. Well, they could, say the airplane manufacturers. The new planes can operate on 100%, but the older planes cannot. And as long as they are in operation, it has to be blended because security, so safe flying, is the number 1 criteria that we have. There are also a lot of new pathways in discussion, as you see on the left-hand side, and there's circled methanol, because this is the most promising one, and may also be quite meaningful to many North African countries. We have discussions in Morocco, for instance, to turn municipal solid waste into a synthetic gas, and this is synthetic gas into methanol, and that methanol can then be used for various chemical processes in the chemical industry. It could become a fuel for shipping, or it could be turned via methanol to jet into a SAF. So you have these alternatives, right? And you can produce methanol from various feedstocks. So I mentioned municipal waste, but it could be the leftovers from agriculture or from forestry or sewage plant. So there are many, many possibilities, and you have a little bit more flexibility. Right. But what I actually was asked to say is, okay, how does the world look like right now in terms of SAF production? This is all the SAF projects worldwide that are recorded, at least by the SAF monitor, by SENA, the CENA. So if you look at the SAF monitor, the next few slides are all taken from there. You can play around with it. It's quite well done and intuitive. These are the 2 types, no? So the bio-based which is the green ones, and the synthetic aviation fuel, which is the blue one, which is the more advanced and more expensive and the better for the environment. So the greenhouse gas reduction of the biofuel-based SAF is maybe 60 to 70%, while the synthetic brings us down to 90 to 100. So this is what we are really looking after, but currently that is 10 times the price, and there's very, very little in the market. If you then only limit with the filter of what's actually under construction, well, the map gets less busy. There is no dot in Africa, no dot in South America, a few in Europe, a few in North America. And I mean, just by looking at this map, you know, this is insufficient to really make a dent. And if you then look at what's in operation, it's a little bit the same amount. Now we have a dot in South America at least, and 2 dots in MENA, in UAE, I guess. These are both. But it's not enough. And if you take it seriously, we have to invest much more. This is the same map, but now not one project, one dot. It is the size of the project and the type of the project. And here you see quite clearly, and I will show it in a second in another form, that HEFA currently is the most dominant SAF type. What is HEFA? It is used cooking oil from restaurants, from McDonald's and so on and so forth, that you can then turn into aviation fuel. It's roughly twice as expensive, or 2.5 times as expensive as Jet A1, as kerosene. And currently, maybe 90%, if not more, of all the SAF that we are using is HEFA. But as you kind of intuitively feel, there is a limit to it. No, there is only so much used cooking oil that can be used. And so even the biggest producer of it, which is the company Neste, reckons it's maybe 10% of the entire demand can be fulfilled with this HEFA. Then we need other solutions. And then you already see, okay, but there are not that many other solutions around. And many of the projects are very, very teeny tiny spots, which tells you these are pilot plants or very small plants to test. So we are far away from yet big plants that produce SAF en masse. Here's a bit the same information packaged in a different form. The amounts are tiny. We need much more. The good news is there is growth, and the growth is quite rapid. Well, we're starting from a low level, but the growth is there, and it is mainly in Europe, and that has a lot to do with the European policies that Antonio will talk about in a second. I just want to show you a very, very last slide, just encouraging you to look at the SAF monitor. You can then zoom in on every dot and get information from about every project. And this is one from Egypt that I just picked, where you see a little bit where it is. That apparently is only in the planning stage. So they want to get into operation in 4 years, 2030 only by now. So you can make this. And I kind of hope that there are more projects in North Africa, because in the SAF monitor I only found very, very few. So if there's more, I'm very, very eager to hear what those are, in which state they are, and how you look at the industry. I hope there wasn't any interaction in the agenda, but it would be great if it's not possible today to at least then later on have that discussion. And that's it from me, and I will now hand over to you, Antonio, and I will click for you. Okay?
All right. Thanks a lot, Frank. Thanks a lot for this very good market overview and the latest developments that have been provided. And now I think we are going to move a little bit from the market overview to what we can call key regulatory insights for SAF, because in the end, as we will see, and as Frank has presented, the world market for SAF is still in a very early phase and is ramping up. So it is expected that one of the main drivers of this market is going to be regulation. And then we are going to see exactly how the targets looks like, and as well, what is the relation between these targets and the definitions of SAF in EU law. Why this matter is because on the one side, targets are going to be, as I said, one of the main drivers of the market development for SAF, at least during the first years. And also because these targets could not be applied if there were no definitions on which to base them. So definitions in the end include the minimum requirements for a fuel category to be considered as such. So we are going to have an in-depth look on the different EU definitions and how this relates to the targets. So we can move to the next slide. So as most of you know, there is an EU regulation, which is an EU regulation is one of the legislative vehicles that the European Union uses, and it has one of the highest authorities because it doesn't have to be transposed in member states' law, but is directly applicable. And as probably most of you know, the RefuelEU Aviation Regulation includes what we called the SAF targets. These SAF targets include at the same time a sort of sub-target on synthetic aviation fuels. So I think it's important to first of all know who these targets apply to. And then in the end, the ones responsible for achieving these targets are the member states. But as well, they will apply to the aircraft operators and the EU airports. I think one thing which is key is to understand that in order the fuel quantities to be counted towards the targets, the fuels have to be uplifted at EU airports. So, for example, if you are thinking about a trip between Casablanca's airport and the EU, if you uplift the SAF in Casablanca, this will not count to the targets. No, the fuel has to be uplifted in an EU airport. And here, what we see in the table just on the bottom of the slide is how the different targets are increasing. So we start with a small tiny bit in 2025, a small share. And then we increase all the way until 2050, where the target is that we include 70% already of SAF, and then 35% of what we call synthetic aviation fuels. And then we can move to the next slide, where we are asking ourselves, yeah, okay, but what is exactly SAF in EU law? Because we saw that in Frank's presentation, we hear the word SAF, I don't know how many times, but many. And what is actually the difference between SAF and synthetic aviation fuels? What counts to which target? And I think, although maybe for some of you it's information that you know, I think it's very good to sometimes, provide a brief reminder of this issue. So we move to the next slide, and here what I have tried to do is to summarize a little bit the different fuel categories that we have under EU law, summarize the main inputs of these fuels, so how this fuel should be produced, and then what is the legal reference where we find the requirements that these fuels have to include in order to be considered pertaining to one of these categories. So we start with the notion or the term SAF, which in the end means Sustainable Aviation Fuels. And within this definition that we find in the RefuelEU Aviation Regulation, then we have four main categories of fuels that are considered SAF. So the first one is synthetic aviation fuels, that as you know, are the ones that are produced by renewable hydrogen and a sustainable carbon source, an RFNBO. And here, for this definition, the RefuelEU regulation refers us to the Renewable Energy Directive, where, as you know, there is an article where we find the definitions for each fuel, and then at the same time, this definition is complemented by the famous delegated act, where we have the requirements for the renewability of the electricity, the sustainability of the carbon source, etc. Then we have the advanced biofuels that are most from waste and residues, notably. And then again, the RefuelEU Aviation refers us to the red, to a very particular annex, which is Annex 9, and in Part A, we have the advanced biofuels. And then we have the conventional biofuels from, for example, oils and fats, notably. And then we go to Annex, to the Part B of this annex that I just mentioned. And then the last big category of SAF that we have, of sustainable aviation fuels under the RefuelEU Aviation, is what we call recycled carbon fuels. And those are from waste, non-biogenic carbon sources. And again, the RefuelEU Aviation refers us to the red to exactly know how these fuels are defined. And now we are going to look at a type of sustainable aviation fuels, which are the synthetic aviation fuels, are the ones that for which we have a separate sub-target. Now we can go to the previous slide. Yes, thank you. So there we have the as you know, the RFNBO that we all know based on renewable hydrogen. And then for which we have the definition in the red and the delegated acts. And then as well, and I want to put the focus here because probably it's the less known type of synthetic aviation fuels and as well of SAF, we have renewable hydrogen for aviation, so in gaseous form, not as a fuel. And as Frank mentioned, this is probably a story in 20 years when maybe planes can run on hydrogen at a larger scale. And then what is quite interesting is that we have another category called synthetic low-carbon aviation fuels and low-carbon hydrogen. And here, what is interesting is that in order to find out how these fuels look like and what are the characteristics of these fuels or that these fuels have to fulfill in order to pertain to this category, then we have to go to the Hydrogen and Gas Directive, to the Article 2, where we have the definition for low-carbon hydrogen and low-carbon fuels. I think a very important nuance of these fuels is that they have to come from non-fossil low-carbon hydrogen. So meaning that these fuels have to be produced maybe with decarbonized electricity, which is not 100% renewable because maybe it does not fulfill all the requirements of the red delegated acts. So that's an overview of the different sorts of fuels and where we can find the definition of it and the requirements. And then we move to the next slide where we are going to see, okay, we know what each fuel category looks like, or what are the requirements, but what counts to which target exactly? Which sort of fuel I can count towards which target? And then I think, sorry, Frank, but you will have to very quickly several times. So yeah, we have for the sustainable aviation fuel targets, so the overarching targets that go from 2% in 2025 until 2050, we see the synthetic aviation fuels, the advanced biofuels, the synthetic low carbon fuels and low carbon hydrogen for aviation, biofuels and renewable hydrogen. And then we have the synthetic aviation fuels targets, the one that goes from 1.2% until 35% in 2050. And then here what we can count is the RFNBO, so the renewable fuels of non-biological origin, mostly hydrogen as a fuel, mixed with a sustainable carbon source, and also renewable hydrogen for aviation in gaseous form, which is, as we said, not very likely to happen soon. And the last sort of fuels that I just talked to you about, which is the synthetic low carbon aviation fuels. So that's a little bit to put a bit of order in this sort of technological pathways towards the different fields and what count to each target. And if you're curious or you want to dig in more into this, where to find the legal reference of these definitions, which in the end will connect you towards the targets. So now we move to the next slide, and to make things a little bit even more complicated, and I think, Frank, sorry, but you have to click a couple of times as well. We have situations in which we may combine different production pathways, or even that we can mix different sort of fuels. Because some SAF production pathways may be combined or lead to the production of a mix of fuels. So as an example, if you are producing a SAF, so a sustainable aviation fuel, and then you use biogas in order to get your syngas, but then you mix this biogas or biosyngas with an RFNBO or an RFNBO-based syngas, then you can have a mix of sort of a biofuel and an RFNBO, which maybe it sounds for you very far away from your daily operations or what you encounter daily, but those are very common and practical questions that many refineries, for example, are asking themselves. We have this situation and this question in a pilot project we are accompanying in the PTX hub in Algeria, where the refinery is asking itself, okay, what happens if I mix, for example, a fossil input with RFNBOs? What percentage of RFNBO will I get in the end, and how do I account it to the targets, which maybe is a very specific and bit of a nerd discussion, but it pops up quite often. So in the next slide, it's just an introduction to what our expert today, our guest expert, Matthias Almann, will talk about. So what happened when, for example, I mix green inputs with, in this case, gray inputs. So what is the share of the green input that I get in the end? Should I distribute it along the different outputs that I get, or can I allocate everything to one output? So with this introduction, I think, this is the end of my part, and then I hand over to Mr. Altman, and very happy to take questions in the end, and if there is time, and as you know, if not, there is the Helpdesk that is meant for all of these exchanges and to ask all these questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I take over. I understand.
Yes,
happy to be here. And thank you very much for the very interesting presentations already. Sorry for being a few minutes late at the beginning, but I hope I haven't missed too much. The more it goes into details, the more interesting it becomes, and for me as an expert, I think. So I will share my slides as well to go into co-processing questions. And I just understand it's not only co-processing, but also co-products. So I'll mention this, but it's not explicitly on the slides at this moment. So let me go into that. So you'll get the slides, I assume, after the presentation. So I don't need to introduce myself here, but you can see about my CV and just a quick introduction to my company I represent. It's a highly specialized consultancy boutique on renewable fuels, established in 1982, and we've been working on renewable hydrogen ever since. So that's the core expertise that we have. And personally speaking, I've been working on certification of renewable hydrogen and derivatives since 2014. So the questions I understood I should discuss today would be these four ones. So what conditions must be met to be able to speak of co-processing? How are the shares of renewable and non-renewable outputs determined? And I added here biofuels, RFNBO, and conventional. That's it's not only renewable or non-renewable, but there's also a difference between RFNBO and biofuels. We've just seen from Antonio that this is important also in terms of the targets and sub-targets, which are different for biofuels and non-biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels under the ReFuelEU Aviation regulation in Europe. So third question, how does co-processing affect the shares of RNBOs and of biofuels in the final output? That's very close to the second question. And question number 4, how is the RFNBO greenhouse gas emissions methodology applied in a co-processing framework? So which inputs must be considered in the methodology and how the resulting emissions are calculated among the different outputs? Now, let me try to go into that. And I have, in principle, one slide showing a graphical representation and one slide with text. And I hope I'll be able to explain those questions to you. Now, in order to simplify the issue and allow for an easier understanding of this, I've not taken the example of SAF production, but I've taken the example of methanol production, which may be, if you take the methanol route, an intermediate product that you can then use for producing SAF. So in this sense, it's compatible with the SAF topic, but not as complex as that. Now, co-processing in general is if you have different types of inputs. And in this case here, we're not necessarily talking about different chemicals, but it's about different groups of products, or feedstocks better than products. Products come out, so feedstocks go in. So it is about co-processing of different feedstocks. And in this example, it's biomass that is used in a process that's called gasification to produce a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. And on the other hand, on the top, you have what is here for RFNBO production. That is renewable electricity of non-biological origin, so from wind and solar or other similar sources of renewables, and it produces hydrogen in an electrolysis system. So you have one stream of feedstock that is hydrogen that goes into the methanol synthesis here, this plant, and you have a stream of carbon monoxide and hydrogen that goes into this plant. Now, you see this twice on the slide. So the important thing here is for the last question of the greenhouse gas calculation, the RFNBO methodology requires you to make a virtual split. So then you split the process into two virtual processes. So that's for the calculation. You produce one virtual process, which is denoted virtual process 1 here, where you only have biogenic feedstock. And so the output of this process is 100% biofuel. And then you take the rest of the process, and that's where RFNBO is partly produced. That's on the top here. That's virtual process number 2. Now, the thing is, you cannot fully virtually separate the biofuels from the RFNBO part, because you need the carbon to synthesize methanol. So hydrogen alone doesn't do the job. Therefore, the upper process is still a combined process of bioenergy input and RFNBO energy input. So in the end, you get, and you see here, sorry, let me go the other way around. On the top process here, you have the synthesis part, and there you get out methanol, which is partly biomethanol, which goes to the bottom in the output here, and which is partly RFNBO methanol. And the share of RFNBO and the share of biofuel in the output here depends on the shares of the input. So and that's in energetic terms. So if you introduce here 100 megawatt hours of RFNBO hydrogen and 100 megawatt hours of bio-based excess carbon monoxide, then in the end you will have half of the output, 50% is RFNBO and 50% is biomethanol output. So this example here looks a bit different. So it looks more like 2/3 RFNBO input, 1/3 carbon monoxide based on bioenergy input as the input. So it would be 2/3, 1/3 here on this virtual process. And on the bottom, you have the purely bio process, which is 100% bio in, 100% bio out. So in this sense, then you do a calculation of the greenhouse gas intensity. So first learning, an important element here, the share of the outputs is determined by the share of the inputs in energetic terms. So that's the easy part. Maybe I should say or emphasize again, it's not only bioenergy and RFNBO output that may be produced, but if you also have some fossil or nuclear inputs on the input side, then you also have a third category, which is, let's say, conventional gray, whatever the term is that you want to use, but it's not compliant with biofuels requirements and not compliant with RFNBO requirements. But that's in principle the same approach, just you have, fundamentally speaking, 3 different categories of fuels that can come out of such processes. Now, for the calculation of the greenhouse gas intensity of the lower part, that's 100% bio, so you need to apply the methodology that's defined for biofuels in the Renewable Energy Directive, that's Annex 5, which provides you with a lot of details on how to calculate this, which also provides long lists of default values that you can use there, or actual values you take from your actual installation. So that's, in a sense, straightforward. For the upper part, virtual process 2, as we call it, you have to apply the RFNBO methodology here for those outputs that are RFNBO in the end. And there you need to count the carbon monoxide part as well, because it's the carbon that ends up in the methanol, even in the RFNBO methanol, of course. So that's in some elements a bit tricky how to do this for the carbon content, but generally speaking, you do it in a straightforward manner here. What I have, let's say, simplified a bit in this process here, I mentioned at the beginning, because the overall process has, of course, also the RFNBO production left here, RFNBO hydrogen production to the left of this process, and this larger part here, which is the biomass gasification process. So I've already, for you, done the very first step, taking the overall process and splitting it up into sub-processes as far as possible. So I've already separated out the hydrogen production electrolysis part, and I have separated out the biomass gasification part. But in principle, you would have to have these. So first thing is find out those sub-processes that you can split the entire part up into. And so for the greenhouse gas calculation of the RFNBO hydrogen, that's to the left here. First of all, you calculate the intensity of the hydrogen, and you calculate on the bottom here the intensity according to the biofuels methodology of the carbon monoxide plus hydrogen mix. And then you take these as input values here to the greenhouse gas calculation of the RFNBO share and for the bio part here. So those inputs you need. And therefore, this is already the second step that I showed you. So that's in principle the way forward. Of course, there are a number of details of how to apply this for carbon monoxide, and you need to make sure, especially how to deal with the carbon, because the methanol in the end includes carbon. And when the methanol is combusted or consumed in a way also for SAF production, then if you have SAF production after this, then the carbon is still in the molecules, but then it's combusted in the airplane. And in the combustion, you emit CO2. Now, unfortunately, biofuels methodology has a different approach to accounting those emissions. For biofuels, carbon from biological sources is always neutral. So it's zero at the input and zero at the output. CO2 emitted from biofuels combustion is zero by definition in the methodology. For RFNBO, you do it differently. You subtract it and have a negative carbon intensity at the input. And then when it's combusted, you count the emissions and you count them, balance them towards the input, the negative emissions at the input. So that's a difference that needs to be taken into account. At least that's one of the differences between the two methodologies. But in the end, in a sense, it comes to the same conclusion. You have a negative value in the input and a positive value in the combustion emissions on the end of the chain, and these balance out exactly to give zero. Now, this is the second slide that I mentioned at the beginning. This is the text, which is a short version of what I've explained to the graphic before. So it says here, first thing is do a block diagram of the full process, then break down the process into sub-processes, That's what I've already done on the graphics, as I explained. And then you gather the input and output flow quantities of each of those sub-processes. And then you start, on that basis, you can do the calculation. Now, second step is you determine the shares of RF&BO and the shares of biofuels, and if you have conventional inputs, also the shares of conventional outputs. That's done, as I said, on the energy values of inputs, the different inputs into that. And then third step is you do a separate determination of the greenhouse gas intensities, and that requires this virtual splitting of the overall of the relevant sub-process into one that's 100% biofuels and one that has a combination of biofuels and RF&BOs, and then you do separate calculations there on the different methodologies. Now, coming back to the 4 questions in the beginning, the number of questions 3 and 4 is missing. I'll add this, but what conditions must be met to be able to speak of co-processing? So if we say co-processing, it relates to the inputs. We have different types of inputs, not chemically different, that's not relevant here, but different classes of fuels according to the sustainability requirements. Biofuels, RF&BO, and conventional. That's the 3 classes. The output shares are determined based on the input shares in energy terms. So if that's 50% RF&BO, 50% biofuels, then the output is also 50% RF&BO, 50% biofuels. In this sense, question number 3 is more or less identical to the question before. So input shares determine the shares of output. The RF&BO methodology is do virtual splitting and then apply the RF&BO methodology to the RF&BO part, apply biofuels methodology to the biofuels part, and whether you have combinations, you have to apply the RF&BO part, RF&BO methodology for the combinations to give the intensity of the RF&BO output. Now, at the beginning, there was, well, that's for co-processing. Now, in the beginning, I understood you also want to know what's the shares in the outputs if you have different types of outputs. So if you produce from methanol, then synthetic aviation fuel, or sustainable aviation fuel, maybe partly synthetic and partly biofuels. And you also produce, let's say, diesel. For simplicity, you cannot produce 100% aviation fuel. You will also always have a mix of outputs. Now, for that, I unfortunately don't have a slide here because I didn't understand I should cover that as well. But keep a long story short, each of the different outputs has the same shares of RF&BO, bio, and conventional. So if you have 20% RF&BO output, then 20% of the aviation fuel is RF&BO, 20% of the diesel is RF&BO. You cannot simply say all of my aviation fuel is RF&BO and the diesel is biofuel and conventional. This is not allowed. So I think I've covered what I have prepared. And if there are questions, I'm happy to go into those questions and try to answer on the spot.
Thank you, Mr. Almann. You didn't miss much. I mean, we just introduced you to everyone, so we're glad to have you with us today. I'll ask if we have any questions either type your questions in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and go ahead and ask your questions. Antonio.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we have other questions, so because I don't want to monopolize the brief time that we have for questions, but very quickly. Thank you, Mr. Almann, for the overview. The reason we selected this topic is because we are facing these questions in one pilot project we are accompanying in Algeria, where the refinery is thinking how to mix the fuels and what will come out of it in the end and how to account it to the different packets. But yeah, my question is that in the previous slide that you showed, when you will have just one output and then you are mixing different inputs, first you calculate the share of output that you will get based on the share of input, and then you calculate the GHG method footprint after that. But if you do that in this order, what about if in the end, when you calculate the GHG emissions, it goes beyond the threshold that you are allowed to by the definition of a FMBO, which is the 70%, this will affect again your share of output? And then you go to the previous step again? Not sure if... So yeah, that's my question.
Okay. No, though it does not affect, you don't go back. So you have input that is RFMBO hydrogen, and you have input that is bio-based carbon monoxide. And the outputs are RFMBO to the share of RFMBO input and bio output by the share of bio input. And then you calculate the greenhouse gas intensity separately for the two. Now, if you violate the threshold, then simply the RFMBO is not compliant RFMBO. It's still renewable, but not certifiable because it does not achieve the threshold. So it's separate calculations and separate tests in a sense. Just you have to do this virtual splitting in order to be able to do the greenhouse gas calculation and test. And if you fail, in a sense, if you fail that test, then that's very unfortunate, but then the product is not cannot be counted.
Okay, thanks a lot for the clarification.
In a refinery, the world is very, very much more complex, of course, because you have refineries work essentially on fossil inputs, mainly. Now you add some RFMBO parts, maybe you add some bioenergy parts, and therefore it's more complex. And then we need to check which sub-processes of the refinery are fully out of the scope of this question here, which are interfering here. And you have a lot of interactions in terms of energies, like heat transfer from one process to another and such things. So I'm pretty sure that you have a lot of complexities in this Algerian project, and that this is not a straightforward thing to solve. And I will not be able to spontaneously sort all of this out. That requires a lot of detailed thinking.
Go ahead, Frank.
Sorry. I wanted to get back to the last comment that you had on the co-processing. Fossil and non-fossil input and attributing to one product. And product is not possible. You have to allocate it to kind of proportionally to all the end products. I wanted to ask you what specific EU rule kind of defines that, and if this is really watertight, because I see a lot of discussion in the industry to challenge this rule? And isn't it that a recent decision has been taken on a Fischer-Tropsch plant in South Africa where they allow it? I don't know if this is an exemption only for that plant or if this is the first crack. Do you know more about it?
I must admit, I don't know about this decision for South Africa, so it's difficult for me to comment on that. Specifically, I know that, it's well known that Sasol operates very large Fischer-Tropsch plants for many decades. And they are producing essentially all products that are needed or used to produce all products needed in South Africa, from coal gasification and Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. So they didn't have only two outputs, as in my example, but let's say at least 7 to 9 from very light end to asphalt at the heavy end. So that's a very complex thing. And there have been a lot of discussions over the last 2 years about exactly this rule, to allocate then or to introduce into those processes some renewable hydrogen that complements those synthesis processes and others. And then you would have to have renewable output or renewable shares in the aviation fuel, in the diesel, in the gasoline, in other naphthas, in asphalt, and whatever. So that was a long discussion, and I know that the European side always insisted on this rule that I just mentioned. But I'm very happy to learn other different decisions on that. So maybe I've missed that. The basis for this way of thinking is the famous Q&A document of the European Commission. The latest version of that is from I think March 2024. The Commission has announced an update of that. But I have not seen it yet. I assume this is not what you refer to, but this may be coming up in the next weeks. And it's not watertight in the sense that this is legally binding, because this is a guidance document by the Commission. It does not have a legal character, like the delegated acts or legal texts which are in force and have legal character. While this Q&A document is something that's, in legal terms, it's a non-document. It's a guidance document which clarifies those. Based on fundamental principles in life cycle assessments, but nonetheless, it's not legally binding. So in this sense, I'd be happy, Frank, to understand what type of decision that was. Maybe you can share after the call here the background of that decision, or the decision text, or whatever you have seen.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions, or can move on to some closing remarks? Okay, I think we can conclude our session. Okay, I would like to first thank our speakers, Frank Mischler, Antonio Fernandez, and Mr. Almann. Thank you for being our special guest today. I just want to remind everyone, or all our partner countries from the Southern Mediterranean, to make use of the Helpdesk. You can. We will be sharing this presentation as well. You can ask your questions to the Helpdesk experts by scanning this QR code. You can also join our industrial circle by also scanning this QR code, where you will get to know more about our activities and have access to our newsletter and we look forward to seeing you again in our next quarterly info session in April. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Has been
Thank you
great.
very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.